Well, good morning. My name is Jack Stolzheimer. I'm the District Attorney of Delaware County. We're here today to talk about the charges that we've brought in two election fraud cases. So let me just say from the beginning, I'm flanked by Doug Rhodes, who's Deputy District Attorney for Special Investigations, my first assistant, Tanner Rouse, and Jim Allen, who's the Director of Elections here in Delaware County. Very proud of the work our election operation does, working with our election security team. To have secure elections in this country, law enforcement has to work to make sure that we follow up on every potential investigation of someone who is violating our election laws. We've taken a robust attitude towards that here in Delaware County, and today are the first two cases coming out of this past election. The first is a very simple case. We are charging an 84-year-old man named Philip Moss. And one of the principles of our democracy is one person, one vote. Mr. Moss seemed to believe that he was entitled to two. So he voted both in person in the state of Florida, and he completed a mail-in ballot to vote here in Delaware County. He has admitted to this. A warrant has been issued for his arrest, and he will be coming back to Delaware County to face the misdemeanor charges that we've brought. The second is a little more complex. I want to talk a little bit more about this. This is a woman named Jennifer Hill, who was charged with multiple counts for having fraudulently registered people to vote in Pennsylvania. And you'll see from the charges that there are about 40 charges, as Doug will explain later. They're all for each of the four counts. So the lead charge is forgery, but there are counts related to each of these fraudulent registrations. And Jim is here, and he can correct me when parts that I get wrong. But Ms. Hill lives in Collingdale, Pennsylvania, and she was employed by an organization called the New Pennsylvania Project. They have various affiliates that help them do their work. One of their functions is to do voter registration drives, and she was employed as a canvasser doing voter registration for this organization. To help her in that, they gave her some devices. The Pennsylvania Department of Elections, the Pennsylvania Department of State, which runs our election system here at the state level, makes the SURE registration system available to people both online, but also to some organizations that are doing voter registration drives through an app. And the New Pennsylvania Project had that app, and it was installed on a device that was given to Ms. Hill. And between April of this past year until September, we know that she registered using that device 310 people, of which 181 we believe were successfully registered. 129, which is a big number, were not successfully registered. And from our investigation, and I really want to give Jim Allen and his team all the credit in the world, because, Jim, I'm going to try to explain the system here, but literally what this woman did was to pad the numbers for her employment. She started registering people that were dead, one of whom was her dead father. Another was a person who died in her house, the same house she's living in right now, in 2011, and she knows that because she was the person who called the police to come when he died in her house. So she completely registered dead people, tried to do it using different varieties of their name, and she successfully registered somebody who I think is a fictitious person, but was the name of her, I think, grandmother that she gave a different date of birth to, and that one, the registration was successful in getting through to the state system, which is a flaw in our system. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But the way I understand it works is she would use the app to go online and send in the information to the state to get somebody registered to vote. The state then requires certain pieces of information, one of which is your driver's license or your last four digits of your Social Security number. If they have those successfully, they can upload that information from the state databases, send it down to the county. The county, it's called a verified registration. The county, Jim's people then go and put your vote or your ward and precinct and all that information and actually issue you a card, a voter registration card. Some of them the state can't verify, and they send them down to our election office or whatever county it is, and those people then get contacted through what's called a HAVA letter. That's the Helping America Vote Act federal law was passed in 2002 after the 2000 election fiasco. That letter basically goes out to that person saying, we can't verify this information, can you give us more? Jim's people, and Jim is one of the people, and I think Crystal, who noticed that some of these that were coming in from Ms. Hill's app were the same variations of the same name. Again, this person who died in her house in 2011, she tried multiple times to register that individual, Mr. Reed, using either different spellings or different addresses or different email accounts. They noticed these clusters of these fake votes it's not fake votes, excuse me, fake registrations. And they immediately contacted Tanner and Doug, and we began an investigation. That has led to the charges today. Ms. Hill is being charged with, again, 4 counts of registering people, including her dead father and a person who died in the house she currently lives in 2011, that she was the one notified authorities that he was dead in that house. So she knowingly registered dead people or attempted to register dead people through the state system. She did register a fraudulent person, and my understanding is this is sort of a gap in the system where by putting in no date of birth and no Social Security number, is that right, Doug? It goes through and it became a verified voter registration. She did not take any further step. That person, fictitious person, did not vote in the 2024 election. But that shows you how we still have gaps in our system that we need to have the legislature address. All of you, being in the media, have seen the stories about what's going on in places like Bucks and Montgomery County with some of the rulings about Act 77, whether there's the proper date on the outside envelope. All of that kind of stuff needs to be addressed by the legislature, and I think they need to take a look at this case as well, as does the Pennsylvania Department of State. I think they need to look at all of the registrations that Ms. Hill forwarded to them, and it was just incredible detective work by our crew, taking the lead from our election staff, who do fantastic work, taking that lead and then being able to put them to the IP address of the device that Ms. Hill used to try to commit this fraud. But I think the Department of State in Harrisburg needs to take a look at every single registration that she submitted to make sure that they are not fraudulent. And I think our legislature needs to take a look at the law again and see if there are gaps that need to be filled. So I just wanted to, again, thank everyone on our team for all the great work they did. We still have open investigations. There is still more work that may happen in these cases as well. Ms. Hill was brought into custody today, is that right?
That's correct.
And is now being put through the arraignment process, and we will later today know what her bail is and all of that information for you. So, having said a lot, can I take any questions?
The 4th person in Hill's affidavit, can you speak to that at all, where that name came from?
I don't think we really, Doug, do we know that where that name came from?
Yes, so of the 4 individuals for which she was charged submitting the false registrations, one of those 4 was a name or a misspelling of the name, Catherine Baccassini, that being what we know to be her grandmother's name. And because that particular registration was not submitted with a corresponding data point with which to verify, meaning it wasn't submitted with a social security number or driver's license, there was no verification check to trip up that application, so to speak. So that misspelling of the name, Catherine Baccassini, became a registered voter. As the DA already alluded, there was no additional action taken upon that fraudulent voter registration. Quite simply, she did not take the next step and cast a vote for that fraudulent registration that was able to go through.
Yeah.
Sorry, I meant the other man.
Yeah. So Baccassini, her father, was one she tried to put through. Reed, who died in the house, she tried to put through. Catherine Baccassini, her fictitious person, we think it was her grandmother's name, but she used a different date of birth. And then there's a person named Christman, I believe, who we don't know where she got that name from. And again, Alex, we don't know from the other 129 that were non-verifiable how many of those were made-up names. Again, and the Pennsylvania Department of State, I believe, needs to take a look at all of the ones that were submitted by this individual, and frankly, I think they should look at all of the ones that were submitted by this organization. It could be just one bad canvasser, but they should take a look and make sure that all those people are legitimate registrations.
there was a mention that these canvassers are paid a salary, but they also get bonuses. Can you talk a little bit about that? Do you know if like the bonus comes from more names you submit?
We don't really know. I think the safest thing to understand is that she was trying to show her employer that she was doing the work. Whether or not there was a bonus or whether or not there, again, we didn't get into that. It doesn't really matter to us at this point. But what was important was that she was employed by this organization, and we think that that's why she was out there being so aggressive and creating fraudulent registrations.
Do you believe that was a motive, that she was just trying to impress her boss? There wasn't a more nefarious motive there?
We don't have to prove motive. We haven't, gotten a motive from her, for example. I'm sure that if this case continues to go forward, and if it goes to trial, that might be an issue. But for us, it's irrelevant.
Did she admit to doing that?
She hasn't admitted to doing it, but she is under arrest, and I'm sure at this point she's got legal counsel who is probably explaining to her the peril she's in, the legal peril she's in. These are, when you send registrations in that go back to the device that you have in your hand, and one of them is your own dead father, and one of them is a person who died in your house 13 years earlier, it's pretty hard to say it was an accident or something else went wrong.
What is the legal peril that she's in? What is she
These are,
facing here?
yeah, the forgeries are felony twos.
That's correct.
Right.
So at this point, she's charged with 10 counts for each of the 4 individual names that we charged her with. So a total of 40 counts. Any one of those counts, there are several F2s, and that's 10 years, potentially up to 10 years of prison on each count of an F2. Of course, Alex, you could do the math, but it's significant peril, enough peril that she could face significant jail time for these offenses.
I understand for the folks that were deceased, they were caught via that HAVA check. How did you all identify her grandmother that did go through?
Well, go ahead, Jim.
Thanks. So if I may, of course, with the help of our voter registration staff and Jim Allen, the first 2 fraudulent names came to our attention. At that point, when it became clear that we may have a bad actor, a bad canvasser in particular, we took steps to identify who that bad canvasser could be. Those steps included trying to identify the canvassing organization, and then ultimately trying to identify that canvasser. Once we identified Jennifer Hill as the bad canvasser from which those 2 names originated, we took a look at her larger body of work, so to speak, to see what other registrations she had completed and to see if there had been any additional fraud. That's when we determined the 2 additional names, the Catherine Baccassini and the 4th name.
So at this point, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask Tanner, I think some of you know that in every election cycle, I ask him to take over and run our election security operation. And I think this was the best election we've had in Delaware County. I don't mind if you would come up and say a few words.
Yeah, I do think it's important to note that this incident notwithstanding, and what we saw and what Jack alluded to, is that we had someone cast fictitious registrations. They were forgeries, but they weren't votes. I mean, what we saw throughout this election, and on Election Day in particular, was just an exceptional display of citizenship. We had almost no issues on Election Day. Certainly nothing that arose to a crime. We saw a populace that behaved in exemplary fashion. Delaware County rose to the challenge. This was obviously a tense time. There was obviously a lot of turmoil. I was taking calls all day long, and there were very simply no issues to report. It was encouraging. It was heartening. And again, in a fractious time, in a time when we're looking for things to say, hey, maybe not all is lost, Delaware County really rose to it and behaved just like good neighbors and good citizens on Election Day.
So to be clear, there were 0, as far as you know, there were 0 votes cast fraudulently.
There was the 1 vote for which we arrested the gentleman, the 84-year-old that Jack alluded to. That is the 1 vote that we know of at this junction.
Was that vote counted, that mail ballot?
Yeah, he voted twice, so he's literally violating that law. And exactly what Tanner, I just want to, You're exactly right. It was, and this was, I think, you and I have been here now for going on 5 years. I think every election here in Delaware County has gotten easier, and I really want to make sure that we thank Jim Allen. He's done a fantastic job as our election chief here in Delaware County. Your entire staff has been great to work with, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you in the future. We have more investigations still ongoing. Every single time they get any inquiry from someone that something fraudulent has happened related to an election, they report it to our office, and Doug, and that's why he works so hard, has been on every single case. So our detectives are doing the work. I just want everybody to know that we're here in part because we want to show that we do know how important secure elections are. That's why we do this work, and that's how we're going to keep democracy here in this country, is making sure law enforcement in a nonpartisan way follows up on every complaint from our election officials, who do a fantastic job. And I just want to thank you all for being here. And if you don't have any further questions for me,
I'm sorry, just get some names when you get a chance.
He's Doug Rhodes.
R-H-O-A-D-S. Douglas.
I say Doug, he says Douglas. This is Tanner Rouse, R-O-U-S-E. Tanner with 2 N's.
And title?
He's first assistant, district attorney. Doug is deputy district attorney, and Jim is the chief. I'm sorry, I should get your title right.
Election director, A-L-L-E-N. First name, Jim.
Jackie did one more question.
Do any of these charges have a federal component to them, given that she's using an app?
Not at this point. The feds, and they are our partners. The fact that somebody voted in 2 different states is a potential federal offense. But usually what happens is the states and the feds work together. As long as a person is being held accountable in one of either the state system or the federal system, again, we work in comity together. So I don't anticipate there being any federal involvement at this point. And they're always there if we need them. They've made that clear to us multiple times, the election security operations that they've run as well.
Was Hill registering Democrats, Republicans, non-party?
We didn't ask.
Yeah.
All we know is the names of the people that were registered. It doesn't matter to us whether they're voting or registering Democrat or Republican, Alex. It was
It's a
completely.
salient point. There's a question: was there an attempt to skew an election?
It's not salient at all. The only thing that is important to us in terms of the criminal law is that somebody was registering dead people to vote.
If I may.
Sure.
So, first off, I want to thank the district attorney's office, and secondly, our voter registration staff, who was exceptional. They were all exceptionally busy this year. They handled a record number of registrations during the course of the year, and let this pair of cases send a message out there that no matter how busy we are, whether it's a small turnout municipal election or a high turnout presidential election, we are attentive to signs of fraud. We will detect it and we will report it, and we're so grateful to the district attorney and his capable staff of following up on the leads and getting into the evidence that we weren't even aware of as far as where these registrations were occurring. These are facts that will come out later that made it plainly clear that these are fraudulent actors. To your point, we do not pay attention to party registration or anything else, whether it's a primary or a general election. We do think that there are areas, as the DA mentioned, that the legislature can look into where certain bad actors, and I don't want to impugn all the people who circulated and registered voters ahead of this election whose work was valuable and valid, but when you incentivize excessive numbers of registrations by paying people by the registration, you open the door for a bad actor to try to inflate, instead of submitting only valid registrations, basically the equivalent of petition roundtabling and circulate and filling in phony, or in the cases that the DA referenced, the names of dead individuals. So that's something that needs to be looked at. We have worked with the Department of State. Both Doug Rhodes and myself have been in steady communications. about the uses of these apps. We think the apps are valid, but we also think there needs to be tight controls and revocation of the apps if and when we detect a problem, until they can isolate who the bad actor is and then make sure that they're living up to the terms and conditions of using that app. So the app is valuable. It wouldn't prevent paper applications from being submitted by the same fraudster. However, we want to make sure that the app doesn't make it easier for fraud to occur. So again, I just want to emphasize that through pre-election testing, through audits, through recounts, and through all the process that we go through, including mailing out voter verification cards to every registrant, whether that's a new registration or a change of address or a change of name, we have safeguards in place, and we do follow up on any signs of malfeasance.
How, there might be a process to it, but how easy is it to find the person, Hill in this instance, who submitted these applications through an app? Because it's pretty quick and easy to just trace those back to her sending them in, or?
Well, I think this experience informed both the CID, Central Investigation Division, and our office in working with the Department of State, so that we've traveled down this road now, and we're going to have a clearer path to be able to contact the Department of State, identify which group submitted these applications, and zero in on and subpoenaing the information. So this was a worthwhile exercise in that regard as well. But it goes to, this serves as a warning, hopefully, moving forward to organizations that use these apps, that perhaps they need to police themselves a little more closely. And if someone's number of registrations suddenly spike, and they're all coming from one location, geographic location, that's a pretty fairly significant sign that there's something wrong.
I just want to be, thanks, Jim. I just want to be clear. You should talk to the New Pennsylvania Project about whether or not they paid bonuses or anything. That's their business. That's not ours. Our only function here is to hold people accountable when they try to fraudulently gain the election system. Everything Jim said is smart and apropos. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania needs to address some of these issues. But from our perspective, we're just going to keep doing the work we do to police it. Whenever you use technology in any human endeavor, you're going to open up the opportunity for people to do fraudulent and criminal things. But I've learned as a prosecutor that no matter what human activity you're talking about doing, whether technology is involved or not, there is somebody who's going to try to use it for nefarious purposes. So there will always be people. We're talking about a handful of registrants at this point, none of which voted except for the gentleman who voted twice in Florida and here. But everybody always needs to be on guard for these things. As a law enforcement agency, we do our work when we get complaints. But the legislature, I think to Jim's point, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania also needs to be aware that there are some gaps still. And the legislature will convene again in January. Maybe they can actually address some of those issues in the next session. So thank you. I think we're good.